World War I was one of the bloodiest and most drawn-out conflicts in human history. Millions of soldiers were swept into massive battles that didn't just last days, but dragged on for years. It was a war where both sides clawed for every inch of ground, every trench locked in a relentless stalemate. And yet, it was precisely because of these brutal conditions that people were forced to get creative. As a result, a series of strange but genuinely remarkable wartime inventions came to life. Things that might have once seemed absurd. Fake trees hiding soldiers inside, papier-mâché horses placed in the dead zone to monitor the enemy, or enormous horns designed to hear airplanes from miles away, all became an essential part of the war effort. Today, we're going to explore 5 of the strangest inventions to emerge from World War I. But first, you'll have incredible luck if you like and subscribe before this video ends. Animals as auxiliary soldiers. During the First World War, it wasn't just human beings who bled for the conflict. Silent, small, and often forgotten creatures became partners, contributing in ways that ultimately saved thousands of lives. The first to be mentioned must be dogs, perhaps the most loyal and trustworthy of all animals. In the labyrinthine trenches that stretched for hundreds of miles, where telephone wires were often cut and thick smoke obscured visibility, dogs became the fastest and most reliable messengers. They were trained to deliver letters, carrying messages in small tubes strapped to their necks, or to run through a hail of bullets to transmit life or death communications from one unit to another. Doberman pinschers were used as night sentries, while smaller, lighter, and more agile breeds were selected to serve as scouts, capable of detecting the enemy's position from a distance. In addition to dogs, homing pigeons also played a role that was no less important. Though they were merely small creatures, in the context of war, they became an irreplaceable means of secret communication. Some pigeons even carried out dozens of dangerous missions, flying through fire and bullets to deliver short, handwritten messages that could mean the survival of an entire battalion. Many pigeons after the war were awarded the French Croix de Guerre as a gesture of gratitude for their silent bravery. But it wasn't only familiar species that were put to use. In pitch-black nights, when any light could be spotted and invite instant death, trench soldiers turned to fireflies as a source of illumination. Although their glow was faint under battlefield conditions, just a few fireflies in a glass jar were enough to light up a map, read an order, or find one's way, without risking detection by the enemy. And yet perhaps the most unexpected creature of all was the snail. In the era of chemical warfare, where mustard gas and other toxic agents could strike without warning, early detection of poison gas could dramatically increase a soldier's chance of survival, and snails became a surprisingly reliable alarm system. When exposed to poison gas, their bodies reacted immediately. They retracted, sealed their breathing hole, and instinctively tried to protect themselves. That very reaction became a signal to soldiers that something in the air was dangerously wrong. This discovery came from Dr. Paul Bartsch of the Smithsonian Institution, who had been studying the behavior of small animals under wartime conditions. By the end of 1918, snails began to be used at certain fronts under the name Slug Brigade. Spy trees. When the battlefield became barren and devoid of anything to hide behind, observing the enemy turned into an incredibly dangerous challenge. In bomb-ravaged wastelands, where every real tree had been chopped down or burned to ash, soldiers needed a way to monitor the battlefield without being seen. And so, the invention of the spy tree was born. The Germans are believed to be the first to develop this unusual creation. Instead of using an ordinary tree trunk, they constructed a hollow iron structure that was carefully camouflaged to resemble a dead tree. From the outside, it looked no different from any normal tree, but on the inside, it served as a hidden and remarkably secure observation post. A soldier could sit inside the tree's trunk and observe the battlefield through a small slit positioned at eye level. Some spy trees were even wide enough to fit 3 or 4 people inside, along with a small table, eavesdropping equipment, and a space for recording information. Every detail was crafted with such precision that even at close range, the difference was nearly impossible to detect. The first known spy tree was erected by the German army in 1917 near the Oostervern Wood, just outside the town of Messines in Belgium. The tree stood about 25 feet tall and was positioned near the British front line. For months, a German soldier inside silently observed every movement of the enemy, crawling in and out under the cover of darkness to report back his findings. Not a single British soldier ever suspected the strange tree was anything but lifeless wood. In the end, the spy tree was only discovered when British forces happened to dig a tunnel directly beneath the position where it stood, but by then, it had already fulfilled its mission. Soon after, the British and the French began constructing their own versions of the spy tree. Engineers and artists were brought to the battlefield to sketch the shapes of destroyed trees and then recreate them in metal, replicating every branch and splinter. These fake but real trees quickly became an effective tool for covert surveillance and remained in use until the very end of the war. False horses. In World War I, the no man's land was the most haunting place on the battlefield. It was the dead zone between two opposing front lines, an open stretch that no one dared to enter during daylight hours. Yet, if one wanted to know what the enemy was up to, that was exactly the place soldiers had to find a way to reach. The French, known for their boldness and creative thinking, came up with an extraordinarily daring solution. They invented false horses. At first, some soldiers tried hiding inside the carcasses of real horses, those that had died on the battlefield. They would hollow out the bodies, crawl inside, and lie motionless for hours, doing nothing but watching. It was a grotesque and deeply disturbing method, one that not everyone could physically or mentally endure. But it was from that grim idea that the concept of the false horse was born. Inside, each false horse was a hollow chamber, just large enough to fit a soldier lying down. Through a cleverly concealed viewing slit, the soldier could observe enemy activity, take notes on their movements, and if needed, even use the position as a sniper's nest. At times, the false horse also served as a temporary relay point for special operations or communication tasks. Much like the spy tree before it, these false horses stood as striking proof that wars were not won by weapons alone, but by intelligence, resourcefulness, and the ability to adapt. Few ever noticed these strange horses scattered across the battlefield, and perhaps that's exactly why they remained effective until the final days of the war. Acoustic horns. Before radar was invented, people had no choice but to rely on their ears to detect danger from the skies. In the early days of World War I, airplanes were still a relatively new technology, but massive airships like Germany's Zeppelins had already begun to sow fear from above. These silent giants drifted through the night, carrying bombs and destruction, forcing the British to find a way to sound the alarm before it was too late. In the autumn of 1916, Commander Alfred Rawlinson of the Royal Naval Volunteer Reserve pioneered an entirely new approach, detecting incoming aircraft by listening for them before they could be seen. He employed enormous sound-amplifying horns, known as acoustic horns or acoustic locators, to capture the subtle noises of distant airships. And to everyone's surprise, the method worked astonishingly well. These devices looked like oversized tubas planted into the ground, but instead of producing sound, they absorbed it, capturing distant noises and amplifying them for human ears. Thanks to the phenomenon of sound refraction, operators could hear approaching aircraft from miles away, even when they were still just faint specks in the sky. In fact, by placing 3 of these devices at different locations, operators could use a technique called sound triangulation to determine both the direction and distance of the target. Though primitive by today's standards, this was, in truth, the forerunner of the modern radar system. Later on, more advanced versions of acoustic horns were developed, not only in Europe but also in Japan during the lead-up to World War II. Some of these devices were so massive that they required multiple people to operate. In certain places, entire fields were lined with rows of skyward-facing horns, creating the eerie sight of a mechanical forest, listening in silence for threats from above. Unfortunately, even with such technology, there wasn't always enough time for troops to evacuate or mount a counterattack before the bombs fell. But in an era when radar was still a distant dream, these acoustic horns served as a silent shield, protecting thousands from catastrophe raining down from the sky. Ayrton gas fan, the hand fan that fought poison. World War I did not only spread terror through bullets and bayonets, but also through poison gas. From the first chlorine attacks to the later waves of mustard gas, chemical warfare quickly became a nightmare for soldiers trapped in the trenches. Amid desperate efforts to survive the deadly fumes, a British scientist named Hertha Ayrton came up with a surprisingly simple solution, using hand fans to drive the gas away. It wasn't a complex filtration system or a sophisticated gas mask, just a lightweight handheld fan that could be deployed instantly. Her idea was straightforward. If the gas couldn't be stopped from arriving, then it could at least be fanned away. And thus the Ayrton gas fan was born. The fan measured about 3 feet 6 inches in length, with blades spanning 15 inches wide. It was made from waterproof canvas, reinforced with rattan and wooden framing, and was sturdy enough to endure the brutal trench environment. A wooden handle allowed soldiers to grip it easily, and the foldable design meant it could be strapped behind a backpack without getting in the way. Beginning in May 1916, over 104,000 of these fans were distributed to British frontline units. Soldiers were trained to use them to waft poison gas out of bomb craters, dugouts, and sections of trench where the toxic fumes tended to settle after chemical shelling. With just a few strong sweeps, a soldier could generate enough airflow to push away the invisible cloud of death creeping through the air. Early reports were encouraging, and during the initial period, the fans were used almost daily at the front. But over time, serious doubts began to emerge about their actual effectiveness. Post-war studies later showed that in many cases, manually fanning the gas didn't reduce its concentration. In fact, it sometimes spread the fumes wider or caused them to shift dangerously in another direction. Instead of saving lives, the fans occasionally made the situation worse. Even so, the Ayrton gas fan remains a curious chapter in the history of war, not just for its unusual design, but because it was one of the few wartime inventions developed by a woman, at a time when science was still overwhelmingly considered a man's domain. Thank you for joining us as we explored the strange and little-known inventions of World War I. These seemingly small stories carry within them a world of ingenuity, courage, and the desperate will to survive amid the chaos of war. If you enjoy content like this, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next mysterious story. We've got so many fascinating things still waiting for you to discover. Until next time.